With Fury Road, George Miller managed to take a tired and dull concept that has coloured modern cinema in a way that is similarly as divisive as the introduction of sound, albeit less so, and repurposed it in a way that hasn't been done before. Teal and orange does work. Sometimes it's striking, sometimes dreadful, and sometimes it's used to subvert the idea, but ultimately it works for its intended purpose of creating a striking, vivid look. Teal and orange are complementary colours, and the reason it is manifested in so many films is simply because human skin tones generally fall within the range of peach, yellow, orange and red. When a colourist is working on a film, it can be very time consuming to create a striking visual aesthetic in a short period of time, so a great way to get close can be just to abuse the colour wheel. Even I've done it. Some of the best working directors today do it. It's not going to go anywhere because it is such a useful tool to have, and for films less concerned with their visual aesthetic, it's a cheap and easy way to get half the job done, leaving more room for a colourist to focus on more critical aspects of the process. The issue is that it's so prevalent, such that it becomes tiring to see and is usually no more than an afterthought. Not to the discredit of amazing colourists working on films today, but it's a lazy catch-all approach. Films aren't shot with it in mind as a core visual aesthetic, which is where it relates back to George Miller and Fury Road. Miller said of Fury Road, the best version is a cheap black and white version of the movie for the composer. Something about it seemed authentic and elemental. He did say this after the film had reached a point where a composer could effectively work on it, but consider that he chose to provide his composer with a black and white cut, rather than giving him a colour version, which is a more standard procedure. Someone had to purposefully convert it to black and white for the composer. Not that it's a difficult task, but still one that someone had to think to do beforehand. Fury Road is absolutely stunning in colour, and although the presence of blue is critical in the nighttime scenes, Miller was careful to craft them in such a way that the pure light values would elicit the feeling of dim light and darkness, without ever actually plunging into black, evoking the feeling of Casablanca, which had similar high-key nighttime lighting. Miller knew fine well what his film looked like in black and white, and knew for a long time how important it is to craft light before colour. Almost all of his films work in black and white just as effectively as they do in colour. He also said he tired of the typical desaturated look of post-apocalyptic movies, so he could either go black and white, which would be considered too art house for such a big budget movie, or go all out on the colour, saying the sky is teal and the desert is orange. What stands out to me is how he speaks in such extremes. There's a similar conceit in black and white cinema that the sky is white and the earth black, then the variances of grey between. When Ben Affleck was making The Town, probably didn't feel like he was working under the same constraints as Miller would on Fury Road. Miller knew that his film would be visceral, and the thing he refers to as authentic and elemental, those are born of the same limitations. Humans react to colour in a very primal way, but colour is an abstraction of light. It's a principal artefact of light and darkness. And even more so than colour, the human mind is adept when it comes to the subtleties in light and shadow. Fury Road isn't just shot like any other film, like The Town, and then slapped with a core of teal and orange. It was crafted from the ground up to work the way it does, and yet while it's by a country mile the most extreme example of teal and orange ever committed to film, it does so with conviction. Miller used it as a tool in the same way the masters of the black and white era used light and shadow simply because it's all they had. He didn't want his post-apocalyptic film to be desaturated as it would look too generic and devoid of interest. But he couldn't go black and white as it's not what the average moviegoer wants to see, so he backed himself into a scenario and took it to its logical extreme, knowingly. I would recommend watching Fury Road in black and white just to see how raw and elemental the film is, while also highlighting how beautifully crafted the light is. For example, and this is purely interpretation, but before watching Fury Road in black and white, I hadn't noticed Furiosa is almost always shown with a shadow cast on her face. This is obvious when she applies her face paint, but there are various scenes throughout, particularly when she appears conflicted, her feeling is represented this way. The constant split between light and dark is her insecurity. She wants to hold on to the hope that she can and will do right by these 5 women, but knows life in the wasteland will never do right by anyone. Max even tells her that hope will only drive her insane, apt for the wasteland world that Miller has created. In 20 years' time, while even great films of today will look extremely dated to the turn of the century, Fury Road will last as a visceral, distinct and carefully crafted film that borrows from its contemporary, but excels in a way they never could because at the helm was a master craftsman who understood how to utilise and bend to as well the core conceit of nearly 2 decades of colouring technique. There's a lot more to say about George Miller and his deft craftsmanship, but for now we can rest easy knowing that Fury Road may ride eternal, shiny and chrome.